I want to thank all of you for coming today. My name is Steve Zeltzer. I'm with United Public Workers for Action, and also I do a program called Workweek Radio on KPFA. And I think that this meeting is an important one because looking at the fight to, around the issue of the mural, the Victor Arnautoff mural, has raised important questions not only about art history and education, but also privatization of education. And we believe that there's a whole-scale attack on public education through charters, through basically consultants and destroying public education in the United States and around the world, as a matter of fact. There's an important connection which really hasn't been raised in most publications except one article by Jack Heyman. We have been struggling to defend, I've also participated in Labor Fest, which is an annual commemoration, month-long commemoration to commemorate the San Francisco General Strike. And as part of Labor Fest, we hold events around the history of the murals in San Francisco, because these murals came out of a history of working class struggle. And people ask, how was this mural of Victor Arnautoff even painted? Because it actually shows the true history of George Washington, which is not well known by most students and most people in the United States, that he was a slaveholder, that he was a surveyor who was actually involved in dividing up Native American land for takeover by settlers. This is part of his history. And that was not known and is not known of most people in the United States. And I think, it's interesting, the whole issue of the Confederate statues, which these have been compared to, racist monuments or racist art to support the Confederacy. Actually, when Trump was defending these monuments, these Confederate monuments, he said, well, what are we going to do? We're going to start taking them down, and then we'll take down statues of George Washington and Jefferson, and who knows what's going to happen next. Well, most people don't even know the history of the United States, so actually I give Trump credit for that. Like, what is it that this is all about? Why would people say, let's take down these monuments? Not that we support taking down the mural, but it raises the question of a history of working people, a history of the United States. And the other thing that's very important, which is greatly concerns us, is that 320 public school teachers in San Francisco have signed a petition calling for the destruction of these murals. Now, I find that rather shocking in San Francisco, which is supposed to be, quote unquote, the liberal city, that 320 teachers would say that we should destroy this mural and spend, $800,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars to destroy this mural. And this is at the same time that they're cutting the budget, that they don't have enough money for the teachers to live here. So we have a serious problem of education, not just of the general public about the issue of these art pieces, but also the public school teachers in San Francisco. And it has to do with the ideology, which is identity politics, that is really supporting this idea that we should destroy the murals. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce some of the speakers. Our first speaker is Tamaka Bailey. He's a Native American elder and storyteller. And he has been come under attack by those who want to destroy the murals for saying that we should learn about them. So welcome, Tamaka Bailey.
When I first started with this, when John Rothman asked me to look at the murals, I didn't know what I could contribute. I didn't know really what to do. But those of you that don't know this, I was on the board of directors of a Native Wellness Center, which is just right down the street here. It's on Julian Street. It's a drug and alcohol rehab center for our Native people that was formed because of the Relocation Act of the 50s. They took the natives, took them off the reservation, said, we're tired of paying you guys any more money, so you're on your own. So this one Navajo lady 56 years ago decided, well, I'm not going to have that happen. We've got to have services for our Native people. So she started the Friendship House. Then the resistance that we've been hearing about the mural, their location is right down the street on Valencia Street, AIM. And they reformed, Russell Means had the right idea. Nobody knew about our plight. even our own people were embarrassed and not proud to be Native because of what we were getting. And so that's why AIM was formed. It was formed around the same time Black Panthers were formed, same time with all of these other resistant, I guess, companies started up. And that's where AIM came in. AIM is American Indian Movement. I was part of being on the Alcatraz takeover. I was there. I got 8mm film of that, wow, in which the San Francisco Historical Society asked for that, and I gave it to them. That's the only experience that I feel that I can give. But the reason why I spoke up is if you take those murals and do away with them, as I told them and I've told the board and anybody that listened to me 1,000 times, you're taking away our evidence that Washington was part of the genocide that the AIM organization is always putting out there and still putting out there. I said, if you do that, might as well throw away our evidence, because if you're going to try to do it by word of mouth, that is what has brought us to this point now. We're trying to say we're still here. You're not listening to us. Well, now you've got evidence that that actually happened. Why are you taking it down? And I don't know how many of you guys were at the board meeting, but one of the resistance had a sign, "Let's start a new slate." That's why they wanted to take the mural down. They wanted to start as if nothing happened in the past. We're going to start from this point forward. You can't do that. You can't do that. How are you going to know that that's not going to happen again? One of the biggest fights that I had, or one of the quotes that I made, was that when I see the mural, yes, I'm angry, but it doesn't offend me. I'm as angry as if I hear the stories from my mom, who was at the boarding schools in Oklahoma, and she took a whipping if she spoke her language. I said, that gets me angry too, but angry enough that I want to sit down and plot out something that is not going to happen again. And unless I had that story, I wouldn't have known how far we're coming from this. Because I've gone back to that boarding school in Oklahoma, Wheelock, and we've talked, and they agree. We need to have that, I guess, memory in order for us not to let that repeat again. So that was one of the things that I was brought out in regards to this. And I looked at that mural in a different light. I don't know how many of you guys looked at it. I know one of the things that I did hear from one of the alumni, the first time that I met with them, was that, oh yeah, what's wrong with that mural? We used to say, let's meet underneath the dead Indian. That's what was getting everybody upset on that side, right, was that there was no respect. So I can see where they're coming from on that. And then to hear it, the first day that I was there, I said, okay, then let me see what we need to do. And exactly what Steve was saying, we need to be educated. We need to tell the students what those murals are all about and to show respect towards that. Because when I looked at that mural, I saw something different than I think a lot of the alumni didn't even see. I told them, I says, did you guys ever look at the foot of the dead Indian there? I says, there's a settler with a peace pipe sitting with a chief, and behind the chief is a tomahawk. I says, I teach the activists this. I says, you know how they took our land from us? They learned our ways. They realized that the native people did not see that land as theirs. They were not the owners of the land. They were the caretakers of the land. And that's how they got it taken away from them. When the government started getting established, they said, oh, then we will become the owners and we will give that land out, and so on and so forth. They didn't see it the same way we did. I said, so that mural teaches me one thing. We have to learn, if we want things back, their ways. so that way we can get things back. And to kind of bring that out, there's two tribes that I know of on the Pacific Northwest. One's up by Eureka, the other one's up by even farther north, closer to Oregon. But because they learned the ways and what the rules were and played by those rules, they got 648 acres, sacred acres, given back to them because they knew how to do it. And that's why I tell them, learn their ways. I says, that mural teaches me what I've been saying to you. They got us to sit down with them, put our tomahawks or our things of war aside, and started working treaties with that peace pipe. Then they took it. I says, so that's what I told them. I says, that's what I see on that mural. And then it was Dewey that brought up the other point, that at the head of that dead Indian is a little bit of a branch from the cherry tree that we always hear about in the history books. I cannot tell a lie. And it was Dewey that brought it out, saying Arnautoff was talking about everything. He was not the perfect person who could not tell a lie, because he painted it right at the foot of that dead Indian, or at the head of that dead Indian. So there was two things that I didn't know about until somebody explained it. And that was one of the things that I talked to the principal at Geoge Washington. I says, we need to educate. You don't have any plaques that tells anything about it. As a suggestion, every school year that starts, they have, orientation. They bring all the students together, show them everything. Why not have in that orientation what those murals mean? Do the same thing. Tell them, right then and there, right up front. Then if you have something like, Lope and I talked about this before, there was, technology has it that you can put like a pane of glass in front of it, and if the light is off, you don't see the murals. You turn the light on, the murals illuminate. So if you have something like that, that would be nice. It would be a nice compromise. And then those that want to learn about art, flip the switch. Now you can teach them the art. Those that want to learn about history, flip the switch. Murals come on, teach them about history. Those who are offended, who are saying that, oh, you're taking away my safe space, flip the switch. Now everybody's happy.
Well, I'm not.
So, well, that was one of the things. And then I was just listening to a conversation before we started, and I did something that I told Lope I was going to do. I went down after the last Board of Education meeting that I was at, where they rescinded their vote to paint it down and put it up that they were going to cover. I says, I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to Stefan. So I did. I went that Monday, the next Monday, I went down to see him. He wasn't in when I first got there. So the outside secretary, there was two of them, she started taking my information. And just as I got to giving her my phone number, he walked in. So I says, Stefan, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do like to talk to you. And I was always brought up this way, that if you're trying to resolve something, you can't resolve anything, if hate is at the center of it. And anybody that's been to those meetings will tell you there was a lot of yelling and screaming going on, and name calling and things like that. I said, so you have to defuse that. So one of the things that I went and told Stefan, I says, I appreciate what you did. I respect you for the comment you made. And the comment that he made was, he said that those that are upset with the board for changing our mind and not painting it down, blame me. I'll take the responsibility. So you can yell at me. So I told him that. I said, I respect. That's a sign of a good leader who's going to take the responsibility like that. I says, but I do remember you said on other occasions that you'd like to hear from other people on decisions to make it easier for him to make it. So I said, are you still open to that? And he said, yes. So my intention was go there, drop that defense that everybody had, because nobody was listening to each other because they already had their defenses up. And it did. It came down because I first brought it out that I respected him as a leader. Then we started talking, but I found out later it didn't get anywhere because he still stuck to his guns. And I was telling him, I said, you know what you need to do is sit down. You've already heard the other side. Why don't you listen to the alumni? They have plans too. Why don't you listen to what they have to say? Hear their side of it, then make your decision. So he appreciated it. But like I said, for me, that was the only way that I've ever been taught. That, and that comes from 49 years of being married, that somebody has to be calm if there's a disagreement. Nothing's going to get resolved unless somebody is calm. You know, so this is why, like I say, with that in mind, that's why I went and talked to him. And I still feel that there's things that can be done, and I just heard that there's some things that Lope is going to tell us today that I'm saddened that it came to that point, but still, I see, and like I was even making mention at the last Board of Education that I was at, if any of our Native people have issues where it's an emotional thing, we have ceremony for that. We don't go to a therapist and tell our deals to them, because to me, and I brought it out because they were calling me a colonialist. I says, this is a colonialist way of thinking. I was at the meeting over at the Union Hall, and the therapist came out screaming from the top of her lungs. I thought, gee, you better take a chill pill. You're really out of this, you know. She was yelling. She needed, what do you call those? Well, yeah, that too. But what's that pill that they give you for anxiety to calm you down?
Prozac?
Prozac. She needed that pill. But what I was telling him, I says, if you looked at it about being colonialism, that's what her profession is bringing out, colonialism. Because if a child, and this is true, because I had 2 grandsons that went through this, if they have emotional problems, hard time learning in school, what's the first thing that those therapists want to do? Put them on a pill. They want to put them on a pill. I says, that's what they did to us when they put us in the reservation, took some of our young people, sent them off to college, made them to become medicine men, and brought them back and says, okay, take care of giving the medication to our people. Medication that was castor oil, and half alcohol, and got them drunk. I says, that was the drug of choice then. Prozac now, or whatever medication will settle it, is the drug now. I said, so who's being the colonialist? I said, because we have ceremony for that. We have ceremonies for our warriors who come back with PTSD. We have ceremony for that. We don't put them on a drug, and it works.
Wow.
And this is why, like I said, I turned to those people and I said that to them. And I don't know if anybody else caught this, but the very first meeting I went to with Lope, when they were having those, talking about that committee, they said, well, what we want you to do is to help us out and listen to our point of view here. And they were just dogmatic about it. And that's where it really bothered me because of this. And then that's when the name calling happened. Those of you that don't know our terminology, if you're a white, I guess you could say supremacist, but you're native, you're called an apple. and that's what I'm being called.
An
An apple, a red apple.
Oh.
Red on the outside, white on the inside. So these were some of the terminologies that came out in the 60s. And I can tell you what some of the blacks were even called. No, they were called Oreo cookies. Black on the outside, white on the inside. And then the same thing with the Chinese, they were called bananas. So, I mean, these were some of the terminologies that were thrown out there, and they're still being thrown out. Coconuts, yeah.
What is that?
Coconuts for the Latinos. So these are some of the things that I try to tell them. I says, like I said, one of the things that I did at that meeting is I gave a gift, because Native Way is that if you come and you speak on somebody's land, in regards to an issue like the murals, that tribal member is supposed to bring a gift to the tribal host. And that's what I did. And I don't know if you guys picked up on this. After I did that, all of a sudden they had prayer circles before those meetings. They never had before. But they were doing them the wrong way, because they were blocking the sidewalk. And they were keeping people from walking through it. I says, that's against the law. I said, you can't do that. If you're going to have a prayer circle, go on the inside had that little metal. They could have had it right there, but no, where the cameras are.
Yeah, they have to be disrupted. That was the whole point.
Yeah. I said, so that's not Native Way. So this is why I got involved, because I wanted to make sure both sides knew the Native Way. So
One of the critical things around this issue is the question of art and art history and artists. And of course, art has always been controversial, and I have to say that I give a lot of credit to the people who want to destroy the murals for making this art world famous and making Victor Arnautoff world famous. Who is Victor Arnautoff? Who ever knew about Victor Arnautoff? It's precisely because of their effort to destroy the murals that they brought us and many millions of people Victor Arnautoff. So I thank them for that. Even though we have a difference about what should happen to this art. So our next speaker is Carol Denney, who is an artist who has done some art and supported the protection of the murals as an artist. So welcome, Carol.
I'm a musician and an artist from Berkeley, and I've for years been a volunteer with Labor Fest and also with the Living New Deal. So I had heard of Victor Arnautoff, but only in conjunction with a lot of the other New Deal artists whose work you can see if you're lucky enough to be able to look around in San Francisco and see the stunning amount that we're lucky enough to have here as a town. So when I heard that there was controversy and it was going to be at the school board meeting, I started to read up as best I could and think to myself, what is it about this mural that anyone could find offensive? And I'd been through the Rincon Annex, and I knew that at one time the color red was considered offensive. So I tried to open my mind, I really did. But looking at the mural or the panels themselves, I thought, well, they're being deliberately or perhaps innocently misinterpreted. So I marched in there with a copy of Robert Cherney's autobiography or biography of Victor Arnautoff, thinking that I would offer to buy anyone who hadn't read it a copy of the book. I did that. I stood there in my naivete saying, I would be honored to give you a copy of this book. It's like a Rip Snorton suspense movie, and it really is. This is an artist. I'm so glad to say I know much more about his life now, and I'm thoroughly inspired by it. And I, like many of the George Washington High School alumni, I would be so thrilled to be at a school that had not just that New Deal artist, but a whole handful of them, plus the architect as well. So I learned a lot at that school board meeting. I thought, this is all about identity politics and safe spaces, and I don't know enough about that. So I went back home and read about the origin of the safe spaces movement. And again, I'm reading and thinking, well, this too is being misinterpreted. So back I come to another of these meetings, and all fired up, and this time, you know, it seemed to me that the ignorance was beginning to look deliberate. I'm still not entirely certain that's the case, but it's hard for me to understand how, in the competing monies in a school budget, someone would put so much money aside to destroy a work of art, which to me is so obviously an effort to be inclusive of the real roots, economic, racist, and otherwise, of American history. Something that I certainly did not have in my school. My school, too, was a WPA school in East LA, where we got bullied all the time if we slipped with something like, I reckon. Both my parents were from Appalachia. So I thought most kids had been bullied, but I also thought, well, one bullied kid is too many. But shouldn't that money that you're setting aside to destroy or cover up this artwork, shouldn't that go to programs so that people start to really get some traction with other people's cultures? Shouldn't that be where we put our focus? Shouldn't it be a really great school for art, culture, and recognition about other people's traditions, and so that nobody would end up anyhow? I had all these thoughts that way. In the meantime, I was making cartoons. So I think I have 6 or 7 now, and a couple of more on the way. They are up there. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So here's a couple of them, and I am considering making up little books for our next event so we could use them as a fundraiser, or I'll just give them away. To me, there is some comedy writing through all of this. But I'm also personally deeply, deeply offended that this could happen at all in a place that I'm sure you guys made the same mistake I made of thinking that it could never happen here. You hear about these things happening in Texas, don't you? You hear about it happening in Kansas. I gotta say, I was fool enough to think that it couldn't happen here. But I also feel, just like Steve said, I'm really, really thankful that this was brought to my attention, and that I see that threaded through this is an effort to privatize the schools and to certainly change the priorities that I just, in my naivete, assumed were guiding school policy. And I really want our kids in San Francisco and in the Bay Area to have more than I had. I want them to have cultural education as well as every other. I want them to have art. I want them to know about the mechanisms of New Deal art and how that ever happened, because to me it's magnificent and there's no mystery about it. So it can help inform us as a community. So these guys are standing on landmines. They're saying we can move off to other things. I really enjoy that one. That's one of the later ones. And this is the lady finding out exactly how much it's going to cost. And she ends up crumpled over her desk saying, I think I'm traumatized, because that's their favorite word. And then if you can find a couple of more. Oh, this is one of my favorites, and I'd love to manifest this, the Museum of Censorship, where there's nothing, and you're offered a blindfold as well. And I thought, for one of our fundraisers, we should just have blank canvases everywhere, and we can walk up and say all kinds of things that you might hear at your local school board meeting, and so I get a kick out of that one. Anyhow, that's probably good. I just want to say, so the takeaway for me is, yes, it can happen here. That's the big lesson I learned out of this. And the other thing I learned is I want to give the school board of San Francisco credit for one thing they said that was certainly true for me. One of them said, where have you been? You didn't show up here until we're threatening this mural. Where have you been? Because we do have kids that are in trouble. We have kids that need your community attention. We have serious issues in our schools. Well, I don't have kids, and I had been to a few school board meetings, but it was kind of like that. Something would catch my interest and I would go there then. And you know what? I accept that criticism of myself. I feel like, you know what kind of activist am I if I'm not paying attention to what's happening in the schools, how they're being funded, how they're being threatened with privatization? I should be paying better attention. So I thank you again for letting me participate.
One of the issues that has happened in this whole struggle at the school board is the superintendent, Vincent Matthews, gave a report, and he's the one that set up this committee, which maybe Lope can talk about. But he said at one of the meetings that when he first saw the murals, he was shocked. He was shocked by these murals. And I mean, this guy grew up in San Francisco and he's shocked by the murals. If he was really shocked, why wouldn't he put up signage explaining what the murals were if you can't immediately take them down? But there's been no signage put up, and that's one of the issues that we've raised at the past meeting, that there should be signage, because they're not going to be coming down. They're going to be there, and there should be signage for the students to know what they are about. But one of the issues that we're going to be addressing today, and our next speaker is going to talk about it, is who is Vincent Matthews? And what is his real record? Because I find it shocking. We have a superintendent who's paid over $300,000 a year, and he's shocked about these murals. Apparently he doesn't know about Victor Arnautoff and the murals. I mean, Victor Arnautoff for San Francisco is a pretty well-known figure with Coit Tower and many other murals. So who is he, and what is his agenda? And our next speaker is Jack Gerson, who is an Oakland Education Association past union activist and leader in the state council, and has some experience in Oakland with Vincent Matthews. Welcome, Jack.
In terms of the San Francisco School Board asking, where were you? You have to ask, where were they and where are they for all these years? They hired Vincent Matthews. Well, if you just looked at what he did in his last job, and he has a record stretching 20 years before they hired him, and I'm going to go over some of that because we were plagued with him in Oakland Unified School District as state administrator from 2007 to 2009, and when the state takeover ended in 2009, he was the state trustee who could stay or rescind, that is veto, all contracts or nullify them. And I'll go over what that meant. But all they had to do was look at where he came from. He was the state administrator in Ingleside in Southern California when they plucked him for San Francisco superintendent in 2018. The LA Times had an article in April of 2018, right after he left, about the mess he left them in. Among other things, they say he left day-to-day tasks to consultants. I'm going to talk about what that means in Oakland. That is, this is one of the favorite forms of privatization, which is to say public employees can't do the work, so we have to outsource to consultants who we pay small fortunes to. His consultants and he hadn't monitored their budget. Although the district had tens of millions of dollars, which was supposed to be set aside for facility repairs, very little, almost none, was spent on school buildings in Ingleside for repair, many of which were desperately in need of repair. Ingleside fell into a budget crisis under the state takeover. Why? According to the LA Times and the auditors of the district finances also continue to be strained as a result of declining public school enrollment and the increasing number of district students enrolling in charter schools. Okay, now this is the MO of Vincent Matthews and of his colleagues trained by Eli Broad in the Broad Urban Superintendent's Academy. So I'm going to go over, there's too much to go over in 10 minutes with this guy, even in one location. But I'll try to be very quick about a couple of things, then talk about Oakland. First, he was the principal of the Edison Charter Academy in San Francisco 20 years ago. Some of you may remember that, the for-profit Edison, where there was a big fight and the community got it closed down. It was purging its roles of low-income African-American students and also of special needs, special education students, because they weren't profitable. In order to make profits, the Broad training is bottom-line oriented. Students are revenue sources. Schools are profit centers. So then he became, when that school was closed, they promoted him to Vice President for West Coast Operations. From there, he took a job in Oakland as principal of Dewey High School. He took the job at about the last day of the 2001-2002 school year, and he lasted less than 3 months. In other words, he quit right at the beginning of the 2002-2003 school year, because being a principal in Oakland and actually dealing with Oakland students was not really his bag. He then went into the Broad Urban Superintendent's Academy, where he graduated in 2006. Now, the Broad Academy, when I checked this about 10 years ago, they had already graduated close to 1,000 administrators, and about 600 of them were high-level superintendents and deputy superintendents and the like, although they like to call them often CEOs and chief academic officers, you know, to mimic industry, in urban school districts around the country. And as I said, the Broad training is bottom-line oriented. Now, after he got out of the Broad Urban Superintendent's Academy, Vince Matthews became an educator in residence at the New Schools Venture Fund. The New Schools Venture Fund is essentially a front for the Broad, the Gates, the Walton, and other foundations who pour money in one end and it goes out to charter schools in the other end. Matthews' resume at the time that his biosketch, when he took over as state administrator of OUSD in 2007, said that he was a consultant to an advisor, to 35 charter schools in which there are over 9,000 students enrolled. So he's been a player in this. What did he do in Oakland? Well, in Oakland was put under state receivership in 2003, ostensibly because of finances, because the district was $37 million in deficit. When Matthews left, he was the third of the three state administrators. When he left in 2009, the district was $110 million in debt. He tripled the debt. How did they do this? Because enrollment dropped from 53,000 to 37,000 in public schools. Meanwhile, charter schools were up to, when he left, about between 10 and 12,000. They're over 15,000 now, I believe. 30% enrollment in Oakland is charter schools, highest percentage of any large urban school district in the state. I taught at Castlemont High School, which some of you may know, in Deep East Oakland, MacArthur and 86th Avenue. Our library was closed, along with the libraries of several other high schools and almost every middle school in Oakland. Wow. Librarians laid off. 40% of custodians were laid off. The maintenance staff went from about 80 to about 17 under the state takeover. That's not custodians. In addition to the layoffs of 40, it was food service workers, clericals, and so on. The district was, was downsized and brutalized. Matthews claims to be an advocate for African American students especially, but it was African American students who were especially penalized by the downsizing, the closing of schools, all of which occurred in the flatlands. All the schools that closed were in the flatlands in Oakland. Wow. So, and by the cutting of programs, because it wasn't just closing schools, but programs were dropped. At Castlemont, they broke us into 3 small schools. In my small school, for the whole school, they eliminated French. They excessed. Laid off the French teacher when they closed the library. My school did not have French, it didn't have computer science, it didn't have art, nothing. So everything is shrunk down in the name of the students. They go after squeezing the students, because remember, students are revenue sources for the school's profit centers. Okay, so this is being done in Oakland. Now, Matthews is the third and final of the three state administrators. He comes in 2007. The district has been run by surrogates of the Broad Foundation and the Gate Foundation from 2003 to 2006, and then the Broad Foundation and the Rogers Foundation, that's the Dryers family, Dryers Ice Cream, from 2006 to 2009. Vince Matthews comes in 2007. He stays till 2011, the last 2 years as the state trustee. What did he do? Well, among other things, I was on the, not only the union executive board, but also the bargaining team in that period. I was on the bargaining team from 2007 to 2011. Our contract expired in June of 2008. The district's initial offer was a pay cut. Now, when they came in 2003, they cut wages of all employees across the board 4%. We had just recovered to that level in 2008, and here they come again offering a pay cut.
Wow.
When the contract period ended, it didn't end with a contract. It ended with an imposition, which was almost never done prior to that in California. The state imposed terms on the union. I'm not going to go into what some of us were calling for the union doing and what it didn't do in terms of striking, and how there was only one-day strike. But I am going to say, if you want to know who this guy is, this is a guy who rejected even bad contracts, which they offered small raises, which some of the people wanted to accept on the bargaining team, and the CTA advisors, that's the state union, wanted accepted. But he would veto that. They would come back the next day and say, well, that's off the table, because this, and they couldn't say why directly, but the state administrator, he was now the state trustee, because in 2010, it was once more nominally under public control, under the control of the school board supposedly, but he had the power to stay or rescind. That is, he could say no to any contract, and even if it was signed, he could nullify it. So this is Matthews and who he was. He was extremely anti-union, extremely anti-student, and extremely pro-privatization. He followed through on that. I read you some of the things that he had done when he came in as the state administrator 6 years later, from 2016 to 2018, in Ingleside. In between that, he was superintendent in San Jose. Why did San Francisco choose this person and choose somebody whose whole MO is privatization and wants to cover it by dividing, by claiming that he's an advocate for minority students, when in fact, you know, he is leading the cuts and leading the downsizing and leading the enforcement of horrible lives for them, trying to ensure that people won't be able to get out, won't get a chance. I want to say one more thing. In terms of traumatization, you know, I don't want to take a position and in terms of what it would be like for an African-American student there, but for two things. One is, it seems to me that the curriculum ought to be overhauled in American history, and you ought to have, you know, you have real teaching of what it was like for blacks in this country from the Middle Passage on through Reconstruction to the present. And secondly, the genocide against Native Americans and the whole history there. And then you could show the murals in the context of what really happened. So it seems to me that that ought to be done. Secondly, the students at Castlemont was 99+ % non-white and more than 50% African American. For my students, the traumatization came getting to school every day, trying to make it through. trying to get to school, and those who did, to try to make it through, was an achievement. We had some successes, several successes, but it was on a playing field that was slanted against them. That's what ought to be discussed, rather than closing schools like MLK, and this phony attempt to say that I'm the champion, of the oppressed, which is Vince Matthews. He has been an operative for the billionaires whose goal is quite the opposite.
We have been charged, some of the people who are in favor of the murals, we have been charged with not really standing up and fighting for the students and the kids. That's one of the charges that have been made against us. And actually, I have been, and others have been involved in a long struggle to defend public education, particularly African American students in Martin Luther King and Malcolm X Academy, which was basically forced to accept a KIPP charter school from the Fisher family in San Francisco, helping to break that up. But a very interesting thing happened, and that is after the school board voted to spend up to $850,000 to cover it up, the following meeting we showed up, we were going to have a press conference to call for at least signage so the students would know what the mural was. Lo and behold, there about 40, 50 teachers, students, and parents. Actually, we had a struggle here in San Francisco at the Martin Luther King, and because in 2012, they brought in a principal, Emily Eberhard, who was interested in the STEM program. So what she did was she gave away the band instruments, she shut down the art and the music program. This for an African-American school. And she bullied 17 staff and teachers out of the school. And the union had a press conference at that school to protest that, which we videotaped and which we spoke about. And they then went after the teachers, a security guard there, who they tried to frame up. So lo and behold, there was a battle here at the school board, the following school board meeting after the vote to spend $850,000 to defend the students and the staff at Martin Luther King Middle School. And joining us is Rex Ridgeway, who is a grandparent of a student at MLK and full-time spends his time making sure that the students get the kind of education they deserve. So welcome, Rex.
Thank you very much. I have been a full-time volunteer for my granddaughter, who started at El Dorado Elementary School and now is in the 7th grade of MLK Middle School. And so I have seen firsthand, up and close and personal, of what's going on inside the classes. So I spend more time inside the classes than the principals do and the other ancillary administrators. So I know from where I'm speaking. Let me just start out by connecting to the $300,000 that the school board proposed to cut from MLK Middle School. So a bunch of teachers, almost all of them, as well as about 10 parents and some kids from MLK, we went down to speak our mind about the proposed cut. And to make a long story short, it was effective because the very next day, the school board came up to the school and basically admit that those cuts did not need to be employed. So the victory is that instead of cutting $300,000 from the MLK's budget, it was shrunk down to $54,000, from $300,000 down to $54,000, and so therefore the principal only has to deal with non-human costs. So there are no cuts to the administration. So that was a victory. On another note, which I'm very sad about and disappointed, was Ms. Collins, who is one of the board members, came up to me that night that I spoke. Again, I was one of several parents that spoke about this, and she gave me her business card and said, please get in touch with me, I would like to talk with you. So I did. The very next day I sent her an email, she emailed back, we had a specific time to meet, she just wants to talk to me, And I was, wow, this is great, because I'm usually not out here like this. This is when, you know, so now I am. But at any rate, so the day before we were supposed to meet, she emailed me back, Ms. Collins, and said she has a press conference, has to reschedule, can we reschedule? Of course. I sent her back a suggested rescheduling date. No reply. A couple of days went back, no reply. So I called the main office downtown, I spoke to her secretary, left a message. Her secretary called me back. Said, I've got your message, Mr. Ridgeway. You want to, about meeting with Ms. Collins? And so I told her, we're trying to meet, missing each other. Can you please forward this message that I'm trying to pinpoint a date for us to meet? Again, she's the one who made the offer to meet, not me. Okay, and so then after I hung up, I sent another email. In that email mentioning, I spoke with your secretary, just off the phone with her. I'm pretty open, here's some suggested dates. Never heard from her again. And that's so disappointing because I'm a parent. She is a board of education, and they're supposed to be on fighting for the education of our kids. So I'm just so disappointed with that. The other thing, and I won't be long, as I've gone through the up close and personal volunteering every day, I have seen a decline, a dumbing down of the education of our kids. And I'll give you a quick example. The 2017-2018 handbook, the Student Family Handbook, has on page 7 talks about homework. And it says that on a regular basis, students will be assigned homework, and the homework will be ran by the parents, and the parents can participate in the structure of the homework. Okay, next year, 2018-19, same page, page 7, it says homework will be given when necessary. And the teachers shall communicate how they will give homework. So basically, they took the teeth out of it, which if you read it, just read it, 2017, you must give homework. 2018, and then this year is a repeat, it's ambiguous. The teachers don't have to give homework. Now, as a parent, and the grandparent, in this case with Josie, homework is a way that you repeat, you practice what you learn in school. Number 2, homework is what the school tells me what you're teaching my kid. If without homework, I don't know what you're teaching them. So that's just terrible, and I've seen that. Some other things as an example, just quickly. I spoke to the English teacher of last year, who my granddaughter was in 6th grade, and I was looking at the SBAC test. These are the tests that you have to take each year that shows up on your school grades. When you go to college, they look at these tests. And I was concerned that the English teaching was not focusing on homophones and prefixes, suffixes, idioms, those things like that. Just basic stuff that they should be taught in the 6th grade. And the English teacher told me, well, Rex, Mr. Ridgeway, I don't teach to the test. I almost had a heart attack. Well, if you don't teach to the test, how do they expect to pass the test? If you don't teach to the test, why give them the test? And what's interesting about that, SBAC has a practice test online. So the teachers can tell the students and their parents to practice the SBAC test. They have a test site to help them prepare for the test. So even if you don't teach them in the class, there's a link to help them prepare for this test.
So what was her reaction? What did she say when you asked her that?
What did I say?
What did she say when you asked her?
Oh, okay, good point. So I did ask her, I said, well, why don't you teach to the test? And she went on and said that the way that this, and it's really, I can't really fault her, because she was explaining that at the beginning of the year, all the English teachers get together for their grade, and they discuss the curriculum. And it's not set by the teachers, it's set by 555 Franklin. And what's happening is that the curriculum is basically reading and essays. I mean, that's the heart of it, reading, and I have nothing part with reading. I mean, you have to read, but so much is missing from just that when they take the test. Okay, so what I did, I bought an online program called IXL, and it goes into everything that a 6th and 7th grader needs to know, every grade. And every day when she would come from school, I would have her work on that for 2 hours. And if you miss it, it tells you what you missed. It helps you to correct it. So to make a long story short, her test scores are 200 points above the state average, only because I was able to steer her toward that. If I had not did that, then the curriculum taught inside the school would just be based on reading and writing essays. And a lot of these kids that are coming from the elementary school aren't taught proper noun. The basic stuff, common noun, proper. They don't know, like the vertical pronoun, it's I. Well, it's a capital I if you're talking about me. And the kids are writing it I, period. It just blows my mind. And what's happening is that the teachers are not seeing, if they're seeing it, they don't care or they don't feel like they need to address it. And I did bring that up to the last year's English teachers. And so their response to me was, well, the kids are coming into our class from elementary not being taught this, and we're not set up to teach them that. So my thing is, well, you still need to address it. If I'm a football team and I got the fastest person on earth and he can't catch, I'm not going to not teach him how to catch. I need to teach him how to catch because he's the fastest guy on the team. You got kids coming in, if they don't understand what's the difference, that you have to capitalize Wednesday and October, and you have to put A-N in front of a verb that starts with a vowel. If they don't know it, you can teach them that. But they don't do this, and it just blows me away. So, I mean, but I'm fighting the fight inside, so, you know, we're still doing that. A couple other things quickly. They've taken pre-algebra out of middle school. I just found that out by reading the newspaper last year. Pre-algebra was part of middle school math. 5.5 Franklin, without any repeat, exposure to the public about what you think about this, they just took it out of middle school. So the middle school kids are not being taught pre-algebra. So what's going to happen when they go to high school? They're going to struggle. They have to catch up. I don't even know how it's taught. Do you condense it all in the 9th grade? I don't know. Cell phones in the classroom. Some schools are tight on it, some schools are lax, and that's another thing, that these cell phones get that dopamine hit, the same chemical thing that gives you a high, oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, and I forget the other one, nitrogen, are the same chemicals in cocaine. You just have more molecules. So when you get that dopamine hit, that high that you get, it's the same chemicals that react to the brain when they're on these cell phones. That's why they can't get rid of them. I mean, they're attached to them. Now, we're an older generation. We didn't grow up in it, but these young kids have. And so we're having problems inside the classrooms of these kids having the earbuds now. So you can't even, there's no visible string, cord. They put the earphones on, put the hood on, and they're just listening to their rap music, whatever they listen to, reggaeton or whatever. And the teacher doesn't even know, or in some cases, they don't care. And so that's a fight. They're trying to get them to adhere to a cell phone policy. They have to keep these cell phones out of their presence while they're being taught. That's a big problem. I don't know about other schools. I know it's a problem at MLK, Willie Brown, Viz Valley, some of the other schools in the Southeast. Let's see, one last thing. There's a couple of, but those are the main ones, okay? I guess what I'm saying is you just have to stay in there and fight. And I never thought in my life, I have I have three daughters and one granddaughter. All daughters are college educated. I'm college educated. My granddaughter will be college educated. So I never thought I would have to go and actually fight against the low expectations of the teachers to my kid. The low expectations also hurts the kids, okay? And that's a problem. There's a saying that goes, keep your eye on the ball. I know why now, because it's always moving. You got to keep your eye on the ball because it's always moving. And we have these things like this. This is a good thing about the truth. There's three things you can't hide: the sun, the moon, and the truth, because they will all come out. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rex. So one of the things that are being commemorated this year is the 50th anniversary of the San Francisco State Strike. And I was involved in it in SDS, Worker Student Alliance. But one of the things we fought for, besides open admissions, the right to a free public education, was ethnic studies program. And this coming Monday, there's a flyer, there'll be an all-day presentation by the organizers of the strike and what lessons that they learned, because I think we need the same kind of struggle, united front struggle today to defend public education. And ethnic studies is coming under attack. At that time it was called Third World Studies. But one of the things that we have in San Francisco as a great resource is the Geoge Washington High Alumni Association. And I think unbeknownst to the management of the school district, they were tangling with something that they really didn't understand. So joining us, the next speaker is Lope Jr., and he is the vice chair of this Geoge Washington High Alumni Association. Welcome.
All right, so let's go back. The murals were created, I'll even go back. This is one of the few high schools that I know, or maybe the only high school that I know, that in the beginning, the blueprint of this school already had 6 artists included in the blueprint. So that's kind of amazing when you think about in the 1930s that this high school was built around art and where its location was, or is rather. Victor Arnautoff made these in the mid-30s, and right after he finished them, he joined the Communist Party. And in the 50s, there was an issue with the murals at Rincon Annex by about a very right-wing group of people. That didn't pass. The interesting thing about that, and I'll bring up, is that everyone from museums came together and went to Congress to defend those murals. In this case, that didn't happen. In the mid-60s, I was at George Washington and observed the whole struggle between Black Panthers, the Black Student Union, condemning, criticizing, vandalizing the Victor Arnautoff murals in the 60s. And my dear friend Dewey Crumpler, who I looked at as a student, he was like 3 or 4 years older than I was. I actually watched him struggle trying to convince people that he could do this work. And so he got pressured by everyone in the community, the school district, the community at large. And the only one that really protected him and demanded that he be the person to do the art, response murals, were the Black student, the real heavy activist. I bring this up because Dewey, in order to convince everybody he was the right person and could command the kind of money he wanted and the time allotted to make them, his father was a Pan Am employee, so he was able to fly anywhere. So he immediately flew to Mexico and met the Diego Rivera staff and people so he could immerse himself in murals and understand how to do murals. And then when he came back to the United States, he visited every museum he could find or any place where Diego Rivera's murals were. By the time he came to San Francisco, he sort of like did the Evelyn Wood, I know everything about murals, and kind of explained it to everybody. And was able, over a series of critical meetings, was able to get a contract, many meetings on what he was going to draw, et cetera, et cetera. And he started in the late 60s, and the ceremony for Dewey Crumpler's unveiling was in 1974. There's 2 things that happened at that meeting, or that ceremony. Before the unveiling, 2 or 3 of the alums who were high school students in the late 60s, they asked to speak to Dewey before the ceremony, and they told Dewey they wanted to apologize to him and to Victor Arnautoff, because if they had known then what they learned through the process about art, they probably would have done things totally differently. So, cut to 2019, that also happened to Tamaka when we spoke at the Labor Fest forum at the Longshoreman Hall. One of the female First Nation persons that was there having the backs of all the, what do you call those people? I'm trying to be polite. Those that spoke up, how's that? Correct me if I'm wrong, Tamaka, she came up after the talk and said, you know, after listening to you, I think I'd have to change my mind because I never realized his perspective. That made more sense as a First Nation female, that, you know, she just went blindly to this, I'll protect these women. So there's hope still. I don't know about this board, but there's hope. So, so that, the other thing that happened in the 70s with Dewey, we can't find it. We've looked everywhere. The board hasn't divulged this or shown this, but Dewey swears that he had a written contract, he had a verbal commitment, that his greatest concern after he got the contract to get paid some decent money for being the artist for 4 years, his greatest concern then was, well, wait a minute, what if I do all this work and then two boards later, you guys change your mind and then you're gonna paint mine and Victor's? So he was under the impression, and he just recently told me again, that there was an understanding that no one would ever touch his murals or Arnautoff's murals. Yeah, so that was 1974. Now we're gonna go to 2017, I'll be real quick. There's two current Board of Supervisors named Walton and Haney. 3 or 4 years ago, they were on the Board of Education. I believe it was primarily Haney who suggested to change the name of schools in San Francisco that had anything to do with slavery or the mistreatment of First Nation people. That, as well as the ROTC vote to get rid of the ROTC and to change the names of schools in San Francisco, they didn't pass. But at that time period, around 2016, 2017, there was a group from people of color who always felt they never were heard, and they kept on saying, well, we gotta do something about the name of the schools, and we hate these murals because we don't see ourselves in a positive light, et cetera, et cetera. So when those votes for the schools not to be changed, their names changed, or the ROTC, that slid away for about a year or two, roughly. And then San Francisco Heritage proposed a 110, 120-page application to the Board of Education and the Board of Supervisors, recommending that 3 schools in San Francisco be designated as, I might say this, local landmark status buildings. I say local, right? Real quickly, the first 2 schools, the middle school and the elementary school, at the end of the day, they eventually were designated local landmark status buildings. The same people who protested wanted the board to do something about the murals and the change of names. They got revitalized, and they came and they said, you can't make this school, George Washington, a landmark status unless you deal with these murals. And so as a result of that, through a series of events, the proposal, the application from San Francisco Heritage for 3.5 years or 3 years, I think even to this day, has been tabled in a subcommittee in the Board of Supervisors. Now I'm going to change real quickly. After all these years, and I'll go back in a second, but just I don't want to forget this. After these 3 important votes, meetings, June 18, June 25, and August 13th with the Board of Education, unbeknownst to me, there's another commission in San Francisco called the San Francisco Heritage and Preservation Commission. 3 years ago, and their mission, by the way, is to recommend to the Board of Supervisors and the mayor anything related to history or preservation, right? So after the August 13th meeting, I didn't know this, but they put this on the agenda, and then I got called, and there was about 4 or 5 of us who spoke for preserving the murals at Washington, and no one from the opposition came. And I kind of just saw some glee in the eyes that no one from the opposition came, because they really wanted to close the meeting from the public. And to make a story real quick, August 20th, this meeting, this board of 7, that night or that afternoon, we're going to have to wait a month to vote on this, but it was going to be a unanimous vote. I think it just happened. They actually had the legalese written and everything by their lawyers. And here's the 4 things that you'll appreciate. First, they were basically going to tell the Board of Education, you don't know what the hell you're doing, you should have us involved in anything regarding the murals, regarding history, art, and preservation.
Right.
That was the first thing. Then they were going to write a letter to the mayor saying, we were reminding you that our mission is to recommend things to you dealing with history and art or preservation, anything in San Francisco. So we recommend that you accept our recommendations from 4 years ago or whenever that letter was sent. And then they were going to tell the board in another letter that we recommend that you untable this resolution, take the dust off our letter, and let the city of San Francisco citizens know your feelings. The reason why I bring this all up is the Board of Supervisors, San Francisco Art Commission, most appointed or elected politicians associated with San Francisco have made a point not to stand up for the murals. And just recently, which is kind of a great thing for me, is after Willie Brown, Reverend Amos Brown, Alice Walker, Danny Glover, Dewey Crumpler, Noah Griffin, myself, and some others having press conferences, it sort of like got underneath the skin of certain people. And Willie Brown did some things, and we thought that would be enough for Mayor Breed to have enough cover to come out and say, let's go do something. That didn't happen. So Senator Feinstein, which I actually loved, here's a standing, the most senior senator of California. She writes this eloquent letter to President Cook, and she quotes Danny Glover, which is like, which is what is just, you just gotta love. I mean, I can't make this stuff up. I mean, you know, and I do personally know Diane, but I didn't ask her directly. I did her first 2 or 3, I'm sorry, I'm a filmmaker. I produce movies and direct movies and commercials, and I did her first 2 or 3 campaigns when she ran for senator. And I just giggled because, you know, I know Danny, and I thought, here's this, you know, status quo, senior, pretty moderate Democrat, if you will, quoting Danny about, hey, this is censorship. We just laughed. And so anyway, to this day, let's say the last, I'll go back for a minute, but the last Reflection and Action Group meeting was on February 28th, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we voted. But since February 28th to June 18th, this board did nothing. And I think they delayed the whole thing because they thought that we'd all be going, you know, to camp or something. And they were surprised, right, Tamaka? There was a couple hundred people at every one of these meetings, and we didn't go on vacation. So let me go back. Sorry, I'm ping-ponging, but I didn't want to forget. So because of that application, because Superintendent Matthews and President Cook didn't know what to do, they decided, let's create this this panel, this committee, and let them figure out what to do, and then they could recommend some suggestions to us. So early 2018, that was created, and by September 2019, this commission or panel of 11 people was created. Now, I won't say anything yet, but I was appointed because I represented the George Washington High School Alumni Association, but our task was to have 4 meetings, public meetings, and at the end of 4 meetings to recommend to the school district and the superintendent board what to do. First meeting was pretty much discussing the inaccuracy of history or curriculum or bigotry or racism, et cetera, et cetera. It was really quite good. But then at the end of the first meeting, going to the second, definitely into the third, I start realizing, I go, wait a minute. I'm standing around listening to these people who are on this panel, and I'm listening to people from the public, and I started looking, I go, I know how I got on this panel, but how did these people get on this panel? And then I started thinking, I go, wow, there is no one here from history, no one here from, you know, let's say a scholarly level, you know, a New Deal person. There's no one here from a museum. I'm talking by myself almost, you know, like, and then I started listening to what they were saying and where they came from. And then I realized later, this again later, I feel like, oh my God, this is all precast. And then I started thinking that, well, who created the list, the first list? And then after these 4 meetings, I find out that one of the first persons on the list to be considered was Robert Cherney, the biographer of Victor Arnautoff. Guess what? He was the first one removed. People who we consider experts regarding New Deal, they were removed. I'm going, wait a minute. And then the people that were on, that finally made the list, were people that worked maybe for curriculum or the school district or some kind of association from one of the communities we were talking about. And they kind of like touted this one person who I actually like, and they said, oh yeah, she's with the Art Commission. But then you find out she's really there because she has First Nation heritage from another area, not from San Francisco, and she's not on the Art Commission, she's a staff member. So they kind of used that credibility like kind of weak when I started figuring this out, right? Okay, so then there was times where people could talk, public commentary. And I'm saying, okay, great. And next thing I'm going, well, wait a minute. Where's Dewey Crumpler on this? He's still living. You know, I thought maybe Dewey passed away or something. I go, no, he's still living. Why isn't he here talking about for or against or this or that? Where's Peter and Paul Arnautoff? And then you just start thinking about, wait a minute. And then when they start policing talking time, invariably anyone who was on the preserve side got 2 minutes and 59 seconds. And then when you hit 3 minutes, it was over. And I can tell you there's a lot of people who were there that spoke 10, 12 minutes that were for whitewashing. And then in the dialogue, again, these are people who are on this panel saying, oh, don't worry about this. This will be whitewashed before September 2019. Don't worry about that. Then those names, they'll be changed too. And I go, oh my God. So then I started talking to myself, oh my God, they're going to change names of streets, the state of Washington. You know, they're going to change the name of the Capitol. Oh, why don't we just paint the rotunda in the, at the Congressional building? And oh, why don't we just blow up, blow up Mount Rushmore, just because, we can, So I just started going, this is getting crazy. Am I talking too long? Yeah, okay. So I can tell you a lot of stuff, but let me just tell you real quickly. We have two things going on. There's a PAC called the, what is a PAC? I can't think of it right now. It's the name of the PAC. Coalition to Protect Public Art. I'm sorry. So that takes care of anything political. If you want to donate, there's things over there that we are pursuing on a political level. And I'm assuming we're going to do something for the November 2020 ballot. And it's just coincidental that 4 of the 7 people on the board are probably going to run. So you can check off the, yes, I love this initiative, and let's lose those 4 people. And then on the legal side, yesterday I submitted a press release, and this is probably the first of many lawsuits going on. And then I won't get into it too deep, just know that there's 20 or 30 lawyers working with us in various grounds to pursue this. So we're going to be doing a drip between fundraisers, lawsuits, another letter, another critical, probably someone from some newspaper or an organization. And then thirdly, we're doing 2 other things to protect and preserve, and they're both to try to get George Washington High School on the national register. I was trying to think of the local one, I said. And if we can get that done, National Landmark Registry, and also, we're trying to also pursue the designation of the murals. So in the world of the federal government, WPA, there's 2 laws or 2 rules. There are permanent art and there's fixed art. And through a series of events, for 3 decades, the federal government has forgotten to police where the movable art is, so that if you owned a piece of WPA art and you said, hey, I'm going to sell it to Rick or Steve, you're supposed to call up the federal government and say, hey, I'm giving my WPA art to this person, or we're going to destroy it because something happened to it. Permanent art usually meant that the government was going to give to the owner of the building or wherever it is, right? So we're trying to see if we can fall under that category, which is movable art, because then they would have no jurisdiction at all with this art. So that's what we're doing. So thank you very much.
Our last speaker has been active in the support of the murals and also has been an activist and union person in ILWU Local 10. And ILWU Local 10 has been a key local in the relationship to Victor Arnautoff. So welcome, Jack Heyman.
Thank you, Steve. First of all, I want to start off by commending Lope for being the only one on the Reflection and Action Working Committee or group to oppose the destruction of the Arnautoff mural. And secondly, I was most impressed by this entire panel discussion so far. You're all articulate and passionate about this subject. We have parents and grandparents participating, Native American artist and activist, an alumni, and a teacher, Jack, on the end down there. They all gave excellent presentations. I want to try and put it in a historical context. And I think the person who frames it really best was Roxanne Dunbar Ruiz, who wrote An Indigenous People's History of the United States. And I quoted her in my article, which you can get over there. But to paraphrase her, she said, this is a liberal campaign. The liberal campaign to destroy the Arnautoff timeline, or murals, parallels the age of Trump that has found identity politics, liberal Democrats invoking founding fathers, the Constitution, and American values. I think it is possible that there is actually a deep well of U.S. patriotism that lurks behind the anti-mural campaign. And in that light, I would like to say we're missing one person on the panel discussion here, and that's Colin Kaepernick, who's been taking the knee against this hypocritical kind of patriotism and militarism that precedes every football game. And he's protesting the racist killings in America that are taking place regularly, and the hypocrisy behind the national anthem, which was written by a pro-slaver in favor of slavery, who owned slaves. So Colin should have been here, but maybe we would have had a couple thousand people in that case. So we have to see the context in which Arnautoff painted the life of Washington. And what happened just prior to his painting it was a tremendous social upheaval in the United States, particularly here in the Bay Area. There was a major strike by maritime workers, longshore workers and seamen in 1934, in which police killed 2 strikers, which provoked a general strike. So there was tremendous social upheaval taking place. The entire city was shut down with the general strike. And it radicalized a lot of people, including people like Arnautoff, who had studied under the communist muralist Diego Rivera. And in that light, 2 years after this general strike, he paints the true history of America, which was way ahead of his time, very advanced. In fact, when Tamaka was talking about what he had heard students say about meeting at the dead Indian, can you hold that one mural up with the Indians that are in war dress and armed to defend themselves against the colonialists? That should be, if we win this victory and keep these murals up, then this is where the students should be meeting. Right here. Armed and loaded and ready to defend their interests. So, anyway, so that was the context in which Arnautoff paints his life of Washington. Not only showing that the Indians were fighting back against the aggression and stealing of their land, but also that in Washington's plantation there were slaves. And then when he paints the pioneers going west, it's a ghastly color. The entire mural is really bright colors, except for the pioneers who are stepping over the body of a dead Indian in the direction of the manifest destiny. So, the identity politics, which is the basis for the ideology of people that want to paint it down, it comes from liberal, left, guilt-ridden, mostly white liberals. And with educated professionals like Stefan Cook and Vincent Matthews, people like that. I want to say that this was such an excellent panel discussion. I would recommend to Stefan Cook and the San Francisco School Board that they show this, teaching students what pedagogy is, learning about our real history in San Francisco and in the United States. I think it would be an excellent way to educate the students. There have been protests in the past, and I think Lope touched on some of it in the 30s, right after Victor Arnautoff painted the life of Washington. There were protests against it because the protesters said it painted Washington in a derogatory light. And then as we got into the 30s and there was more and more social upheaval, probably the most famous destruction of one of these murals was Nelson Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family in New York City. At the same time, we're having a general strike here. He destroys Diego Rivera's mural. Why? Because Diego Rivera was a communist, and he was saying the way forward for mankind is revolution. So who does he paint in the mural? Lenin, leader of the Russian Revolution with Trotsky, and also a picture of Marx. The Rockefellers didn't quite like that, so they destroyed that. But the timeline is interesting here, because while he's destroying that, there is social rebellion here. If you go back and read the headlines in all the mainstream media paper, they said there's a revolution coming, there are Bolsheviks in the streets, and a lot of, anti-communist propaganda. That's what prevailed in the 30s, but still, we were able to defend that art in the 30s. And then, after World War II, probably one of the most repressive periods in American history, the McCarthy period, takes place. We had a repressive period after World War I, the Palmer raids, but the McCarthy period was the worst. And it starts off with things like the Hollywood 10 blacklist. So there wasn't only whitewashing, there was also blacklisting. The Taft-Hartley Act, which we in the organized labor movement call the Slave Labor Act, because basically what it attempted to do was stop outright sympathy strikes. That's what built the labor movement up. If workers wanted to support other workers, they would stop working with them, and it spread these strikes, and it's the instrumental tool of the working class for organizing. So the Taft-Hartley Act came down, and then there was the Marshall Plan during the McCarthy period, which was to contain the Soviet Union, and in Europe, talk about other countries getting involved in the United States elections, they're taking lessons from what the U.S. has done historically, which is intervene in everybody else's elections, and if they don't like the result of the election, we've overthrown people, different governments around the world, Allende in Chile, Vietnam, we intervened, and with our own set of dictators there, Diem, and we didn't like the Diem dictators. They weren't, for whatever reason, popular in South Vietnam. We executed them. So we've got a hypocritical way of dealing with foreign politics. So the McCarthy period was extremely repressive. What the Longshore Union did was mobilize and picket at the Rincon Annex. So it wasn't just Arnautoff. The WPA artists, many of them were leftists, and some of them were communists, actually. Arnautoff himself was, and Refrigier, they were openly communists. And there were protests by the HUAC committee that called Arnautoff before their committee to testify against Refrigier, his comrade. Arnautoff refused to do that. People were intimidated, they lost their jobs, passports were taken. Paul Robeson is a good example of that. Woody Guthrie was also harassed and intimidated by the FBI. The United States had, the government during the McCarthy period had a policy of going in and busting unions. Here in the Bay Area, the Marine Cooks and Stewards Union was led by a man named Huey Bryson. He ended up going to jail because they said he lied to HUAC, that he was actually a communist, and people testified that he was at a meeting, and he went to jail, and his union was busted. They attempted to bust the Longshore Union here on the West Coast. But the Longshore Union said, if you dare to deport Harry Bridges or to jail him, we'll shut down the entire West Coast. That's how we defended people's rights. And most recently, the Longshore Union, I'm retired, but I was in there for 25 years. Most recently, we had an article before all this controversy actually began. And you can get a copy of the article from our union paper, The Dispatcher, which is a critical review praising Arnautoff's murals. This is before all this stuff began with George Washington High School. We also went to Standing Rock to stand with the Native Americans in defense of the fight against the pipeline. And I think Tamaka said that he was in the Alcatraz action where Native Americans took over the island. Indian Joe from the ILWU was also there. He was one of the leaders of it. So we have a long tradition of standing in solidarity, taking action to defend people's rights. And I'm proud to say that next month, this November, we're having it's called a caucus, but it's really a convention of elected Longshore members up and down the coast, here in San Francisco. I've got a commitment. You can't hear me? Okay. So I got a communication just yesterday from the president of the Longshore Local here in San Francisco that they're going to put forward a resolution for the entire West Coast that we defend the Victor Arnautoff murals. But this is the kind of role that trade unions need to be doing. The trade union movement, unfortunately, in this country right now is moribund, but it needs to start taking stands on critical issues of education, housing, and other social issues. And not just what so many of the union officials do today. They collaborate with both parties, mainly the Democratic Party, and they don't want to take any kind of strike action over these social issues. That's what I think is so critical right now. So I just want to say that we have some teachers here. I'm glad they came, but the fight is going to have to be led by the teachers' unions. They're the ones that have to take the bull by the horn and move forward on this to show them what real pedagogy is about, not this kind of guilty white liberalism of identity politics. That's the way forward, and I just want to conclude with this quote, that in 1948, we had a big picket outside of Rincon Annex because they wanted to tear down Frigier's murals, which depicted the colonization in California, the racist attacks against Chinese communities, this xenophobia that has been endemic throughout our history. Anyway, so many murals critical of what happened, what really happened to workers in this country. And I want to finish with this one quote. And I'm not saying by any means that these identity politics people are the same, but they parallel this kind of argumentation. This was written on the banner in 1948 by the Longshore Union. And it's a quote from, you can see if you can guess who it is. I'll tell you at the end of the quote. If artists persist in painting in this manner, they should be dealt with by the criminal courts. I was always determined, if fate ever gave us power, not to discuss these matters, but to make decisions. Understanding of such great things is not given to everyone. That was Adolf Hitler at Munich in 1937. Thank you.